Hey, Dr. Neil. Here is chapter 4. Two-part chapter. First part on basically generic good teaching practices for Aboriginal kids. Second part on gifted and talented. Busy work. Don't fall into that unconscious trap of just giving them easy worksheets, even though it might look good when your principal walks past and everyone's hard at it. Of course that applies to all kids, especially naughty kids. Good practice in teaching Aboriginal kids to read. Again, same as all kids, especially ESL kids, phonics based, getting those grapheme phoneme relationships happening. Works best at the bottom quartile, but looks pretty good for all of them too. 95% hearing loss. Wow, I knew that grommets was an issue, but I didn't know it was that percentage in the Indigenous population of kids. Here's the one I found a challenge last year. Finding appropriate text, which isn't easy when you have teenagers who are reading really simple words, because they tend to be little kid picture books. I spent most of my time last year learning French through reading baby books, which is fine for me, but not so cool when you've got kids trying to project a certain image of themselves. And also when you just want them to read for pleasure, not for the sake of learning something in the future. Okay, Aboriginal education officer in the classroom. When I first read this section, I was like, oh my goodness, of course you don't be freaking racist to the other adult in the room. But then I started to reflect again on last year, and I thought about how difficult I found the power dynamic between me and my Mauritian educational assistant, me as the lead teacher and him as the teacher assistant. Kind of meant I was constantly the one telling him what to do. And I just felt like the living curriculum, what was going on in that relationship in front of all the kids, is they were constantly seeing the white woman telling the Mauritian man how things were, what to do, when he used incorrect English grammar, and just the modelling of that power dynamic just kind of sucked when the whole thing we were trying to do was create an educational environment where the Mauritian kids felt really empowered to be the leaders in their community, yet we didn't give them real life daily examples of that. So a bit more complicated than first seems. Teacher expectation, again, I was like, well, clearly having low expectations is not going to work. But here it sounds, Dr. Neil, like you're disagreeing a bit with Chris Sarah. Chris Sarah seemed to do the really high expectations thing, whereas Dr. Neil, you seem to be saying maybe that's not the answer, and maybe like authentic, respectful connection is more of a key than just raising your expectations, especially in a cultural environment where people don't want to be the tall poppy. And then the whole critical thinking thing. Now this one stumped me a little. What page are we on? Page 68. Okay, so fair call that critical thinking is not necessarily valued in most Aboriginal communities, and so that type of questioning, that line of thought, is not necessarily going to come easily. But then I kind of feel like, man, surely we do have some kind of obligation to teach critical thinking, and that whole, for me, it's connected with social justice and being able to imagining the world different than what it is, and getting out there and recreating the world. But I don't know, just accepting things how they are, is that yeah. Anyway, hearing loss. Again, this was kind of like extra confusing because I usually really try and get eye contact with children so that I can kind of see that they're listening to me. But then we've already learnt that Aboriginal children won't necessarily look at you when they're listening. But then if they've got hearing loss, surely they have to look at you. Yeah, my daughter had grommets and she went nearly deaf. And she was lip reading everything, and it's kind of a miracle that she learnt how to read it all, but she did it all through reading facial expressions and lip reading. But if they're not looking at you, I don't know how that goes. Anyway, mobility. So Aboriginal kids will move around a lot more, move to different schools, take big chunks of the term off for funerals and different family events. Getting pissed off is not really going to help, so deal with it. Interactive whiteboards. Easy just to use them as fancy whiteboards. But let's try and remember that they can be really interactive and engaging, and they can be really great for kids that need to move around and touch things. I think this is just a learning process that teachers need to go through, and it takes time. I guess PD is going to help there. Okay, part 2, Teaching Gifted Aboriginal Students by Peter Mirozzi. The language suddenly gets a lot more complicated in this section. Okay, so we know that loads of gifted Aboriginal children aren't going to pop up in IQ tests, which do tend to be culturally loaded. And last year I bought an online reading program for our kids, which I thought wasn't too culturally loaded. And then the section was on phonemic awareness and what sounds the kids could hear, and it was like a rhyming activity, and there was pictures, and for the picture for the word base, remembering these are 8-year-old Mauritian kids who don't speak English as a first language, and the picture that they had for base was an American T-ball base with an arrow pointing at the white square base mat that was on the floor. And then the word that they were supposed to rhyme that with was the word vase, which I didn't even know that you said vase. I thought it was vase. So obviously, no matter how smart those kids were, they hadn't that T-ball was not in their experience at all. They would not have even known the word T-ball, let alone the word base, and then vase in American English. But yeah, we've just got to get culturally appropriate tests, which for me meant writing them myself with Mauritian teachers. But then, I wanted something that was international and outside of our, like an external test, but it just didn't work. Okay, so giftedness is the potential. Talented is when that potential has been trained and become like a mastery or a competency. So the 2 barriers for Aboriginal kids from going from a natural giftedness towards kind of a completed talent: self-efficacy. Oh, so I have a little thingy there. It's going to let me. So not only the belief about themselves, but also how they feel about that. So not and whether they think they are actually able to be successful, and whether they want to be successful, and how they feel about wanting to be successful. And then the forced choice dilemma, which the idea that in a community where standing out and looking smarter than everyone else is not a good thing, the child's in a situation where they can just sort of dumb down what they're showing just to fit in. And this brought me to a scene in my life in grade 9 when I was sitting in this dark and dingy social studies classroom doing a test. and purposely writing the wrong answer because I cared more about what my peers thought than about what my teacher thought. And being smart in that little social group wasn't highly valued. Okay, some projects that are working well. Chaffies. Cooley-Bar dynamic assessment. So this is a standard 3-part tests. So there's a test and then they teach them something and then they test again to see how much the kids can learn in that amount of time. But this one is different because it's designed to break down the barriers that are going to stop the kids from scoring lower than their potential, including some icebreakers and getting the kids to feel good about the test. Seems to be working. Well done, Chaffee. And another project, the Wigay project, meaning clever kid, is doing well. This one seems to be tapping into the social and cultural capital of the communities, and the importance of this was described on page 81. Getting the community involved and getting the kids feeling good about being smart, and having friends who are a similar IQ and social community to them. Okay, chapter summary. So for part 1, chapter summary. 1. Avoid asking the Aboriginal education officers to do the welfare and disciplinary work. Remember, they're actually to help the kids. 2. Students need to be taught to read and write in all curriculum areas, not just in English, and not just in lower and middle primary school. And that's where we get the trying to find the books that are this chapter. It seems like earlier. It seems like the previous chapter summary. Let me have a look. Oh no, it was teaching children to read. Oh yeah, phonics. Yeah, we did talk about that. 3. Students need to be explicitly taught how standard English works. So this is all to do with that language unit and teaching kids whose English is their second language when you're teaching them in English. So creating contextual cues and spending more time at the beginning of a unit introducing all the words and giving loads of context. Especially important for the kids that can't hear you. Give the big picture first rather than talking about bits and pieces. Aboriginal students often need to know the context before hearing about the detail. I wonder if that's a bit of a boy-girl thing as well. Boys like the big picture. Point 6. Be careful about asking Aboriginal students to step outside their comfort zone and display their knowledge in public. Let them do it in privacy first. 7. Avoid individual rewards. Opt for shared rewards instead. 8. Provide positive feedback to students one-on-one, but not so much in front of others. 9. Students who have hearing loss may not understand what is expected of them, and this can bring them into conflict with the teacher. 10. When you first arrive in school, try to get to know some Aboriginal people. Find out about the politics of the community and which children and families get on with whom. 11. Low teacher expectations only serve to disempower Aboriginal people and position them in a discourse of deficit and disadvantage. Okay, part 2. 3 points. 1. Intellectually gifted Aboriginal students are particularly at risk of becoming invisible underachievers. So keep on your toes. 2. Teachers who work with gifted Aboriginal students identify 2 key elements that impact their underachievement: low self-efficacy and forced choice dilemma. 3. Successful programs for gifted Aboriginal children are characterised by some factors including holistic and culturally appropriate programs, opportunities for students to meet other gifted students,